Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out on this rainy day. It's nice to see you all. It is my great pleasure to introduce Tom Weiner, who is a Northampton-based writer, educator, and anti-racism activist who taught for 40 years at Smith College Campus School and co-facilitated workshops on developing healthy boys. He also initiated efforts for a Reparations Commission in Northampton, Massachusetts. And we are very glad to have him here today speaking about his book that he co-authored, In Defiance, 20 Abolitionists You Were Never Taught in School. Please join me in welcoming Tom Weiner.
Welcome. I appreciate you coming out. It's not only rainy, but we had like spring for 2 days. That's over. And just a couple quick fixes. It's not repatriation, it's reparations.
Oh, thank you, sorry.
That's okay. For the descendants of the enslaved. And also the people who have suffered through Jim Crow and ongoing systemic oppression in this country. I helped form the committee. My partner, who is unable to be here today, his name is on the cover, Dr. Amilcar Shabazz. He is instrumental in the reparations efforts in the state of Massachusetts. He forged the committee in Amherst that's continuing to do the work that got $2 million from the town of Amherst. And he also is attending a conference right now in Baltimore, which is why he's not here, of the National Council of the Professors of African American Studies, where he's the treasurer and past president. He is a luminary and a force of nature, and he's not here. But I'm going to do my best to carry on. And the workshop, Developing Healthy Boys, that was mentioned, is for preschool teachers. And I've been doing it for 7 years with another extraordinary co-facilitator, James Arana. And we finished it last night on Zoom from the house I'm staying in Philly. All the teachers are up in Massachusetts, but it's the age of Zoom. So let me start out by sharing with you the story of the title of the book. The title comes from a quote by someone you may or may never have heard of named Bryan Stevenson. He's someone you need to know about if you don't, because he's the person who started the efforts to get black men off death row. And he wrote a book about it called Just Mercy, and then that was turned into a film. Then he created the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama and the Anti-Lynching Museum. He's an extraordinary human being. And he's quoted in a book, another extraordinary writer, Susan Neiman. She wrote a book called Learning from the Germans, Race and the Memory of Evil. And in that book, she describes the reparations efforts of both West and East Germany after the Holocaust. And the second half of the book is about Alabama, Louisiana, the South, and the reparation efforts that need to happen in this country. And that's when she quotes Bryan Stevenson, who said, "You should be proud of those Southerners in Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama who argued in the 1850s that slavery was wrong. There were white Southerners in the 1920s who tried to stop lynchings, and you don't know their names. The fact that we don't know their names says everything we need to know." And then he went on to say this, which is where the title directly comes from. Susan Neiman continues the prescription Stevenson has recommended, and she says, if those names were commemorated, the country could turn from shame to pride. And then she quotes him again, and he says, we could actually claim a heritage rooted in courage and defiance of what is easy and preferring what is right. We can make that the norm we want to celebrate as our Southern history and heritage and culture, and I would say, if only the US history and society and culture. But that was those words, in defiance, was what we decided to have become the title. And then the 20 abolitionists you were never taught in school. I met a woman this morning who was a connection to Trinity College. I did a reading there with Dr. Shabazz about a month or two ago, and we tried an experiment. And I'm going to ask any of you who have the book, you'll soon have a chance otherwise. But if you have the book in front of you, look at the table of contents. We went down all 20 people and said, raise your hand anytime any of these people is at all familiar to you. And not one hand went up, including a couple of the professors who were there.
Wow.
Because this content hasn't been and still isn't being taught. And the way I say it is every one of these 20 people should have statues. Take down those Confederate statues that never should have been put up. All these people could have statues. And I'm going to tell you about some of them. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the cover for a minute. The cover actually has some pictures that are not up there because we couldn't fit it on the slide. One of which is a butterfly. And that butterfly represents Sarah Mapps Douglas. Sarah Mapps Douglas was misidentified in several articles, including one in the black newspaper in Harlem, the Amsterdam News, by one of the people that wrote a blurb for the book, Herb Boyd. He had the wrong woman. It turned out to be a different abolitionist, and we had to dispel that. And then it turned out there was no picture of Sarah Mapps Douglas. And Sarah Mapps Douglas was an extraordinary painter. And it turns out she's the first black woman to have a painting in a book starting in the 19th century. That's the painting, that butterfly. And I'll show you another picture of it when we get the slideshow going. There's also a house on here that's very important for this location, because this house is in Germantown. And it's where they signed the 1688 anti-slavery petition. And tomorrow night, I've got a reading at the Mennonite Meeting House where the desk resides, which you'll see a picture of to this day. And it was one of my dreams to do a reading next to that desk, because it symbolizes an early, way before I knew about, let alone everybody I tell, effort to undo enslavement. And we're still working on it in many ways. So there's also an Oreo, not a Baltimore Oreo, because chapter 20, Grace Anna Lewis, was not only an incredible abolitionist, she was a great ornithologist, and they named this the Grace Anna Oreo after her. Again, there'll be pictures of it in the slideshow, but just wanted to explain a little bit about the cover. Now, before I plunge into one of the people, I want to give you one more reason why I wrote this book with Dr. Shabazz. There was another motivating factor that was affirmed in a visit to the River Road African American Museum in Donaldson, Louisiana in 1993. Kathy Hambrick, the museum's founder and curator, had been trying for the past 25 years to inform people about the history of African American contributors to American culture who have been forgotten. When she visited plantations, as did I, my son was at Tulane University then, along the Mississippi River in the early 1990s, she discovered that enslaved people were still referred to as servants by tour guides. This is a black woman who'd been downsized by IBM, coming back to her parish. You can imagine what that would have felt like. And I lucked out because I visited a plantation where they did that, and I said to them, "You mean enslaved people, right?" And they, "Yes, we refer to them." That was awful. But I made a left turn because I saw a sign that said African American History Museum, and that's when I met Kathy. She told me that one night she had a vision of her ancestors floating on a barge on the Mississippi River, calling out to her, "Don't let them forget us." She was both appalled at the plantation tours and inspired by her vision, and subsequently founded the museum to honor those who came before. She told me of an African proverb that she said clarified her quest. "Until the lion tells the tale," could be the lioness as well, "tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter." That African proverb would stay on the bottom of my bulletin board in my 6th grade classroom for the whole year, because I think that's why this book had to be written. This is the lion and the lioness telling the tale. Well, let me start with a story about one of the first people. Before I do that, I might get to the website at the end. The website that we put together for the book contains questions for each of the 20 people. And those questions were created by Dr. Shabazz, who teaches at UMass Amherst, his students in a grassroots activism class. We brought the book to them right before it was published and had them choose one white person and one black person, because the book contains 5 black men, 5 black women, 5 white men, and 5 white women. And they each chose one of each and had to come up with stimulating, inspiring questions. And that's on our website now, that I hope I get to show you. So I'm going to start out talking to you about chapter 1, person. And I'll tell you what that significance is. And you'll know that everything that happened for her was in the 18th century before photographs. We have a photograph of almost everybody else. 7 of them are on the cover, and we have almost all the others. So, Belinda Sutton. I'm going to read the first paragraph to you from our first chapter in the book, because it tells a lot about what we were trying to do in writing about her. We call her Belinda X, and I'll tell you that in a minute. How humbling it is to write about a person when you do not even know the name she was given at birth. All we know is that around 1725, when this African girl was 12 years old, she was ripped from her home and her family, her people and her continent, by men she later remembered as having faces like the moon. Shackled below decks, a phenomenon we call capitalism takes her through the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean to America. Somewhere along the way, she was branded with the unlikely name Belinda, derived as it is from Italian or Old High German. Added to that dynamic of domination, being renamed, she is owned by the surname of her master, Isaac Royal, one of the wealthiest slave owners in Massachusetts Bay Colony history. When the spirit of independence began to rise in Massachusetts, Royal was so loyal to the British Crown that he fled to England in 1775, leaving behind much of the wealth that he had primitively accumulated. Belinda and the other 11 enslaved Africans he left behind were manumitted, meaning they were freed immediately. But what was she to do? She was in her late 60s, early 70s, had received not 1 penny for 63 years of labor. And she was the parent of a daughter we would now say had special needs. So what she did was, she found a man, we're pretty sure was Prince Hall, who was a lawyer and an incredible champion of women's and especially black people's rights. He's credited with being the founder of the Black Masonic Lodge. She found him, they found each other, and he proceeded to write this. She had no book learning, she was illiterate. He writes this incredible petition, which we have, the entire petition is in the back of the book in the appendix. It is so touching and moving. I wish I had the time to read some of it to you, but I wanted to refer to this part because you fast forward 63 years, she's freed by her master, Isaac Royal, who has fled the country. She has been manumitted, and she's an 18th century woman of African descent who felt justified in demanding unpaid wages. Even my friend Alan Davis, who's got a website, if you Google reparations, his name and his website comes up. He didn't know about this. I understand it's now mentioned in the African American History Museum in DC, but Ta-Nehisi Coates was the one who brought her out to us in his Atlantic article about reparations. He's the one who refers to Belinda as the earliest example we have, not only of someone who tried, but she got some of the money. A piddling amount, but it was something, and it really begins the reparations movement in a lot of ways that no one knew about until very recently. Massachusetts General Court granted her a fraction of what she was owed for the 60-plus years of unpaid labor. Hers is a story of defiant struggle. It teaches us the justness of the unfinished business of reparations, still relevant to us today. See the X? That's her mark. So we call her Belinda X. She went from being Belinda Royal to being Belinda Sutton because she ended up marrying a free black man at some point, and he was gone by the time of the Revolutionary War. Not only was she seeking reparations for herself, she was also the mother of an infirm child. The petition argues on 3 grounds. First, her impoverished condition is a byproduct of a monarchy that is being overthrown. Thus, in the revolutionary process, she should be paid what she is owed from the confiscated property that she was once part of. Her departed loyalist master left behind a fortune. In fact, his fortune helped begin Harvard Law School. So here you have this poor, impoverished black woman asking for next to nothing from a man who's infinite wealth. Second, she worked hard and produced part of that wealth that the state now owns and should get what she is owed because that is justice. Third, reparations in the form of monetary support will reduce the harm that has her and her daughter on a short downward path to the grave. In other words, as a matter of poverty reduction or the extension of a social safety net in our contemporary parlance. So that's really what she was asking for, way before it was fashionable. In the chapter on her, there are several other people who in that time period tried to get reparations unsuccessfully. So she got highlighted because she was so persistent. There were at least 2 or 3 petitions. This is the one in 1788. The earliest was 1783. And then some money got dispensed, and then she got nothing after that, so she did it again. And each time there was some small amount that she was able to live on until she passed. The petition is one of the earliest recorded statements we have of a demand for reparations, but it is obviously more than that. It is a defiant cry for help, for justice, and that Black lives matter. The mention of, quote, visiting a sacred grove, unquote, to pay, quote, devotion to the great Orisa, who made all things, is mentioned in the petition when she describes when she tells Prince Hall to write what her life was like in Africa. It's a remembrance of a life, an African way of life, that slavery murdered. You cannot repay that, but you can repair the damage done or die trying. Belinda chose to die trying, and therein lies her defiance. So I want to move ahead with the slides and then move to another person. And please, any questions you have, raise your hand now. This is a small enough group I can just answer anything, and then we'll keep going. Anything you want to know about Belinda, reparations, anything that... Okay, so here's who's next. And I'm not going to talk about all these people, but I want you to see them. So Paul Jennings was the valet to James Madison. We don't know that. He wrote the first ever reminiscence about life in the White House. He's also credited, and the chapter describes it, with saving the portrait of George Washington in the War of 1812, when Dolly had to flee the White House. But most importantly, in terms of our purposes, he helped plan and lead the largest attempted escape of enslaved people in history. 77 people on a boat called the Pearl out of DC on the Potomac. And tragically, it hit the doldrums, and they caught up to it, and they were all captured. Paul escaped blame because no one would name him. But he's a fascinating guy, and the story of that, this is the oldest photo in the book. That's a daguerreotype, because he's in the early 1800s. It was an incredible challenge to get permission to use that photo. Miraculously, his ancestors, whose names I had, whose names I had, were online. So I had their phone numbers, a brother and a sister. I called them up. The brother was thrilled that we'd written a chapter about his ancestor. The sister was way more demanding. Send me the chapter. I've got to check it out. And we had to change a bunch of things to make sure she was okay, pertaining to the concept of Uncle Tom. Because he worked in the White House as the valet, she was afraid that people would immediately assume he was Uncle Tom. She didn't want those words in the chapter, and we put them in to say what he wasn't. But for her, it was enough to really... So we took that out, and we got permission. And that is the manumission. That's when he was freed by Dolly. When James died, Dolly was impoverished, as sometimes happens. She was supposed to free the enslaved people. She didn't. She sold him to Daniel Webster, who freed him. So an amazing story, as are all of them. That's the butterfly. I wanted you to get a really good sense of, in those flowers. That's all Sarah's work. And she is a Quaker when it was really hard to be a black woman being a Quaker. Mary Ellen Pleasant. She was one of the first black women millionaires on the West Coast and has an incredibly complicated life. One of her achievements was giving $30,000 to John Brown for his efforts. But she was unto herself, fought against discrimination on trolley cars or horse-drawn cars in the 1830s and 40s. She had her finger in every pie. Extraordinary woman. We have a poem about her at the end that's really quite entertaining. I'm going to be talking about him at length, so you just take a look at him. I'll bring him back. Lots of them were influenced by abolitionist family. Her father, that's a postage stamp from Canada, because he was an incredible abolitionist who, from the cradle, taught her the importance of the role. 140 years before the efforts to integrate Boston public schools, he had a lawsuit trying to do it in the 1830s and 40s. Extraordinary man, one of the first black lawyers in America. The reason, that's John Stuart Rock. First black man lawyer to speak in front of the Supreme Court. But he also coined essentially the concept of black is beautiful. And I'm going to read the paragraph because we're doing okay. I can go till 1:30? 1:15? 1:30, okay, cool. And John Stuart Rock said this, and that's why this picture's here. I will not deny that I admire the talents and noble characters of many white men, but I cannot say that I was particularly pleased with their physical appearance. If old Mother Nature had held out as well as she commenced, we should probably have had fewer varieties in the races. When I contrast the fine, tough, muscular system, the beautiful, rich color, the full, broad features, and the gracefully frizzled hair of the Negro with the delicate physical organization, wan color, sharp features, and lank hair of the Caucasians, I am inclined to believe that when the white man was created, nature was pretty well exhausted, but determined to keep up appearances. She pinched up his features and did the best she could under the circumstances. I would have you understand that I not only love my race, but am pleased with my color. And while many colored persons may feel degraded by being called Negroes and wish to be classed among other races more favored, I shall feel it my duty, my pleasure, and my pride to concentrate my feeble efforts in elevating to a fair position a race to which I am especially identified by feelings and by blood. Fast forward, that's 1840s. Fast forward, 1962, the first ever Black is Beautiful fashion show. Natural hair, beautiful woman sitting on the hood of a car, photographed by Kwame Brathwaite Sr. And I was able to get permission from his son, who now, as recently as 2 weeks ago, I saw the movie he has helped make about his dad. It's really fantastic film if you want to write him. Kwame Brathwaite, his photography is outstanding. So moving along, she, at 16 years old, attending a play in a theater in Boston with a white friend, wrote away for tickets, got the 2 tickets, and went to sit in their seats. And immediately was accosted by the people, the ushers, saying, "You can't sit with the white people." She's saying, "Look at my ticket. I bought this ticket. I'm going to sit here." They took her by both arms, and she ended up being thrown down a flight of stairs. She sued the theater, got incredible money back, and got a pledge to integrate the theater from that day forward. 16. And then she went on to have a speaking career as an abolitionist. Abraham Galloway was a spy, this is right before the Civil War and during. He would have been an illustrious member of Congress, died at 33 tragically, but he was so bold and brave during the Civil War, did incredible things. So here's our Germantown guy. There's the desk, there's the house. This is the founder of Germantown, Daniel Pistorius, working through William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania. Obviously no picture because this was 1600s. And this is who I'm going to talk about next. Maybe some of you heard that there was a play about him in Philadelphia this past summer. I had a vision of us selling books outside the play, but it never happened because he's one of my favorite people in the world. I call him the inventor of guerrilla theater, street theater, because all 4'11" of him was undaunted, in defiance throughout his entire life as a Quaker, pushing the Quakers like Daniel Pistorius and that petition did. And here's the kind of things he would do. This happened in 1738. He entered the Philadelphia Quaker Yearly Meeting dressed as a soldier. Carrying a sword and a Bible concealed beneath his overcoat, he delivered a long and impassioned speech describing the horrors of enslavement. I do not know how they got the transcript of this from 1738, but this is a quote. "Oh, all you Negro masters who are contentedly holding your fellow creatures in a state of slavery during life, well knowing the cruel sufferings those innocent captives undergo, especially you who profess to do unto all men as ye would they should do unto you. You might as well throw off the plain coat as I do." Just as he arrived at the climax of his oration, he took off his coat, held the Bible in one hand, and pierced it with his sword. Inside the Bible, he had placed a rubber bag filled with bright red pokeberry juice. The juice splattered those sitting close by, and he continued to speak. "It would be as justifiable in the sight of the Almighty, who beholds and respects all nations and colors of men with an equal regard, if you should thrust a sword through their hearts as I do through this." His intention that the liquid symbolized the blood on the hands of his fellow Quakers for not opposing enslavement. It was made with dramatic flair, and that's why I call him the inventor of street theater in 1738. And then, as you read this chapter, you find out this was only one of many of these kind of feats. He would stand at the church door, barefoot, in the snow and ice, and say, "I'm experiencing this suffering to remind you of the suffering you're causing for enslaved people." He crusaded against the tobacco that they were making people, enslaved people, pick. He was extraordinary, and he wrote a book. And the book was edited by another Benjamin I'm pretty sure you've heard of, Benjamin Franklin. So his book was called "All Slave Keepers That Keep the Innocent in Bondage," edited and published by Benjamin Franklin. Franklin's editing greatly improved the writing, and the contents were explosive. He began the book with a statement of devotion to his Quaker beliefs and his desire to serve the community with the book. His goal in writing the treatise was to expose the great and grave contradiction between the beliefs and actions of too many of his fellow Quakers, and to undo, quote, "the great hypocrisy at the heart of the American self-image." Does that resonate for anybody about what's going on right now? You don't live too far away from where they took down that exhibit in Philadelphia that was telling the truth about George Washington enslaving Una Judge. And I was there in October because I did a reading with Dr. Shabazz at Mother Bethel, the oldest black church in America. That was a great thrill. And then I had an afternoon to walk through that exhibit, and I saw a high school class, mostly black students, and two guides. And I approached them and I said, I had my book with me, I said, "I've been writing a book about what you guys are talking about." And they were thrilled to hear about the book. And I had such a wonderful visit, and then within a couple months I find out, along with 17 state legislatures that are seeking to get rid of curriculum that they call divisive. And then I read about how that exhibit was taken down. And a courageous judge. I have another friend who every day is writing Defying Trump and tells about someone in the country, lawyers, university presidents, different people who are defying, and that judge is getting that exhibit put back. So I think the hypocrisy is not over. And now we're going to celebrate the 250th birthday in a way that will not necessarily ring true. So here's how the chapter about Benjamin ends. Nowadays, Benjamin Lay still remains an obscure figure, but he should be remembered as one of the few Americans of his generation that recognized and refused to compromise with the evil that lay at the heart of their society. Benjamin made his own life into a parable. He knew that people would tell stories of his apparently crazy things that he did, and he knew that this was the moral lesson he was teaching, that it would spread. And while he preached a love for all mankind, he recognized that there was no contradiction between that and refusing to compromise with those who drew their wealth from human suffering. He was, in many ways, a man ahead of his time, but in many other ways, he was exactly the man his time needed. And boy, do we need Benjamin Lays today. And the world today would be a worse place if he had not been in it. for that we should be grateful. So that's the ending quote about this extraordinary man. I loved learning about him, I loved writing about him, and I love sharing about him. He's an amazing human being, as are they all. So let me drop back. Well, let's go ahead for a minute. I want to show you a few more. This man had 400 black people at his funeral. He was an educator of black children, children with different kinds of disabilities, an extraordinary human being, absolutely amazingly gifted. And that's a woodcut of him being the teacher that he was. Founder of Brown, but originally a slave ship owner. And his brother kept the slave ship business going when he essentially converted. As you all know the song Amazing Grace. That's someone who was a slave ship captain who, in a horrific storm, vowed to give that up and ended up being a minister and writing that extraordinary song. Well, Moses Brown's in that category. I'm trying to get a reading in Providence, Rhode Island, in the school named after him, at Quaker School. This was, in many ways, the most extraordinary of the Underground Railroad people in the book. That's the house that was many, many people escaping enslavement stayed with her in that house. And she writes eloquently in a journal about the encounters she has with many of them, and they're in the book. Here's our most contradictory person. She was an abolitionist, a feminist, an extraordinary painter. That's a self-portrait. It's in color, but didn't get in color in the slideshow. And she was also horrible about Native Americans. And we decided to put her in the book because we didn't want to make it seem like everybody had to be perfect. And we wanted to also, the story does show a little bit about how she became so hateful towards Native people. But we felt that she deserved all these other accolades heaped upon her. She deserved to be in the book. Way before her time a feminist. She was the first woman to report from Congress. And she was also unbelievable about women's rights in marriage, because she had a horrible marriage to a dictatorial husband. She got out of it and got property back. So many things that were outstanding about her. Have you ever heard of Berea College in Kentucky? The founder, an extraordinarily devoted minister who came along at a time when Kentucky was exploding. Kentucky had almost equal parts Union and Confederate, and he walked right into the middle of that. And that man on the right was a defender of him. His name is Cassius Clay. You might know that name from the original name of Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali's father named him after a white abolitionist, Cassius Clay. I didn't know that till I did this research. That's him. He was a staunch defender of John Grigsby, up to the point where he was like using weapons to prevent the slave holders from attacking and killing John. And that woman is important because Berea College was the first college to accept blacks and women in the South, modeled after Oberlin. You may have heard of Oberlin, which also had blacks and women. In 1904, a staunch segregationist got a law passed called the Day Law, because its name was Day, barring any more black people coming to any college that was where white people were in Kentucky. Berea had to end admissions of black people. Talk about injustice. 50 years later, 1954, they got black people back in, and that's the first woman graduate in 1954. She's an extraordinary story. She's in that chapter. Okay, I think there's just three more. Delia Webster I compared to a woman in my valley named Frances Crowe. When she was asked how many times she'd been arrested for protesting nuclear war, nuclear weapons, Vietnam, she said, not enough. This woman could have said that in the 1800s. She got arrested over and over again for aiding people in the Underground Railroad. Incredible woman. And if time permits, I'll tell you a little bit more about her, about Sally Holly. That's her partner. We're pretty sure they were a couple, way before that was able to be known. And both of them started an incredible school for black women. But she also got the calling from an abolitionist woman named Abby Foster, who said, I need someone to join me. Will anyone speak out on behalf of black people? And she was 19 or 20. She stood up and said, I will do that. And then she devoted her life to it. The woman on the left is Sally. And here's the woman they named the butterfly after. Excuse me, the Oriole. Grace Anna Lewis. She was a staunch abolitionist and also a great ornithologist. Okay, so is the 1:30 time with Q&A as well? So I'm just going to talk about one more person who is, to me, the Malcolm X of the abolitionist movement, Henry Highland Garnet. So let me say a few things about him. He was to Frederick Douglass what Malcolm X was to Dr. King, pushing for more activist, even, you may know the quote, by any means necessary. And that's who this was. So here's the beginning. El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, commonly known as Malcolm X, is considered the 20th century's most uncompromising and resolute enemy of the evil system of white supremacy. All over the planet, his example of fierce determination to call out racism and to prod people to action against it has endured far longer than the short 39 years of his life. In the century before him, there arose another warrior who never achieved the acclaim of Brother Malcolm, but who was certainly as deserving. Henry Highland Garnet is his name. In 2018, a Time magazine article celebrated Henry's life and called attention to him as an overlooked but crucial figure in the anti-slavery movement. The article echoed the sentiment expressed by William H. Brewer, an associate of the eminent Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who founded Black History Month, as well as the Journal of Negro History. In the January edition of the journal, Brewer wrote that Henry, quote, deserves front rank as the radical forerunner of Frederick Douglass. So Henry was extraordinary. We're going to argue in the chapter that the key to unlocking his importance is to understand how he was a champion, not of the freedom and human rights of individuals, but of a new African people. His genealogical and historical roots return us to a time before U.S. chattel slavery, before the transatlantic slave trade, and before the existence of the Euro-American colony, nation, or people. He was the grandson of a chief or king within what had once been the Mali Empire. It was in the 1500s that tens of thousands of Mandinka children, women, and men began being captured and shipped to the Americas to be chattel slaves, meaning slaves for life. The Mandinka were first heard of in the 1970s when the author Alex Haley traced his roots back to the village of Jufure in the Gambia. And the grandfather of his great-grandfather Kunta Kinte was severed from their Mandinka roots. Henry's grandfather was also captured, and his life's brand as a Mandinka leader was renamed to slave. A thing, not a person, not a part of a people, but a piece of someone else's capital stock. So we go on to tell the story of how the family was enslaved, the generations, and then how they escaped. They escaped because they convinced the master of the family they were going to a funeral. They didn't go to the funeral. They ended up eventually in New York City. And it was in the African Free School, number 11, with classmates, that Henry would go on to become a noteworthy abolitionist. Henry, having trained to become a minister and having developed powerful oratory skills, did something none of his fellow abolitionists thought to do: direct a speech to the enslaved themselves. You may have heard of Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," which I think is the most extraordinary speech in the English language, addressed to white people. We participate up in Northampton in reading it every year. People take turns, like 40, 50 people will read that speech. If you've never read it, if you don't take too much else from this talk, go read that speech. It is pertinent to now. What to the Slave is the 4th of July. It was nonetheless addressed to a white audience whose consciences he was trying to reach. Garnet's address to the slaves, in its entirety in the appendix, was not intended for white people. It was directly addressed to enslaved people. And I'd like to read the first paragraph and the last. Brethren and fellow citizens, this was delivered in 1843. Your brethren in the North, East, and West have been accustomed to meet together in conventions, to sympathize with each other, and to weep over your unhappy condition. In these meetings, we have addressed all classes of the free, but we have never sent a word of consolation and advice to you. We have been content in sitting still and mourning over your sorrows, earnestly hoping that before this day, your sacred liberty would have been secured. But we have hoped in vain. Years have rolled on, and tens of thousands have been borne on streams of blood and tears to the shores of eternity. While you have been oppressed, we have also been partakers with you. Nor can we be free while you are enslaved. We therefore write to you as being bound with you. Many of you are bound to us, not only by the ties of a common humanity, but we are connected by the more tender relations of parents, wives, husbands, children, brothers and sisters, and friends. As such, we are most affectionately addressing you. So that was his introduction to talking to enslaved people. When he used the word to write about it, this gets written down, and a lot of people get to read what he said. Who could read, or who could have someone read it to them, because he really wanted it to spread. He goes on and gives an incredible history of slave rebellions to try to demonstrate that that method is worth pursuing. He talks about Denmark Vesey's rebellion, Nat Turner's rebellion, and he's trying to move these people to take up weapons. And this is how it ends. And that's how I will end. It is in your power so to torment the God-cursed slaveholders that they will be glad to let you go free. If the scale was turned and black men were the masters and white men the slaves, every destructive agent and element would be employed to lay the oppressor low. Danger and death would hang over their heads day and night. Yes, the tyrants would meet with plagues more terrible than those of Pharaoh. But you are a patient people. You act as though you were made for the special use of these devils. You act as though your daughters were born to pamper their lusts, the lusts of your masters and overseers. And worse than that, you tamely submit while your lords tear your wives from your embrace and defile them before your eyes. In the name of God, we ask, are you men? Where is the blood of your fathers? Has it all run out of your veins? Awake, awake, millions of voices are calling you. Your dead fathers speak to you from their graves. Heaven, as with a voice of thunder, calls on you to arise from the dust. Let your motto be resistance, resistance, resistance. No oppressed people have ever secured their liberty without resistance. What kind of resistance you had better make? You must decide by the circumstances that surround you, and according to the suggestions of expediency. Brethren, adieu. Trust in the living God. Labor for the peace of the human race, and remember that you are 4 millions. I think that speech resonates with our times today. Don't know if you heard about it or if you're planning on going, but March 28th is the next No King's Day. We're fighting an oppressive force as well. I'll stop there and would love to have questions.
Your process for researching to identify these people, and how many hours went into that research?
I never kept track of the hours, but it took 6 years, and it was laborious because you had to really dig deep. Lots of stuff is now online, and people have written books in which these people appear, but it's been a dive. It was a deep dive. And that's why I wanted this book, because I want people not to have much trouble finding out about these 20. Fact of the matter is, the other question that goes with that one is, how did you choose them?
Right.
And that was incredibly painful. My first book that I wrote is called Call to Serve, Stories of the Men and Women Confronted by the Vietnam War Draft. And I interviewed 63 people in every category, those who served, those who left, those who resisted, went to jail, those who chose conscientious, everything. A chapter at the end, those who loved, counseled, and supported 6 women. I had to pare it down from 63, which was like a 700-page book, to 33. That was torture. This was a little torturous as well. There are many, there should be in Defiance 2 and 3 and 4. Instead, I'm hoping to get another friend to turn it into a graphic novel or for younger people, because these are people that I wanted in my classroom, and they weren't able to be found. Another question?
No, I had the very same question.
Yeah.
Could you explain the medallion?
Explain.
The medallion. It's out front.
Oh, the medallion. Thank you. Thank you. That is a great story. So that medallion was made in England in the late 1700s. Here it says 1834 because they borrowed it, recreated it, and it says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" And we have it in there because we connect Henry also to Dr. King. Because Dr. King's last effort was to support the sanitation workers in Memphis. And his last fiery speech was the night before. And he had marched that day with the workers. And they held a sign, maybe you remember it, "I am a man." And this says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" It's received some criticism for depicting an enslaved person with chains. But I think it was trying to say, you can't do this to me. I am a man. Do not treat me like this. Just those sanitation workers saying, "I am a man. Look what you're doing." That's why it's there.
And what's the writing underneath?
A voice from Great Britain to America.
I'm sorry.
A voice from Great Britain to America, 1834. They took it from there and implanted it. And it was actually at a parade to celebrate West Indian efforts for independence in those years. Because Toussaint Louverture, Haiti was liberated in 1804. There were countries that were places where, of course, France exacted extraordinary payment. They made Haiti pay France for the enslaved people being free. That, if you want to know the origins of why Haiti is as impoverished as it remains, that's it. And it took more than a century to begin to make a dent. Another question, please. I've still got several minutes. Yes, please.
Where was Garnett from?
Where was Garnett from in terms of, well, originally, ancestrally Africa. Then they were enslaved, I think, in Maryland. And then, it's in the book. I don't remember everything. But when they fled, they got to a place in Maryland where they could be freer. But they kept going, and he was in New York, where he grew up. That's where he went to school, hung out with amazing classmates who went on to be abolitionists, who could be in the sequel. His sister, the slave catchers came after them from that plantation, and there's a section in the chapter about him where his sister had to fight off a guy who came after her with a knife, and she just barely escaped because she went down a fire escape. It's tales that are just, you won't be surprised in a way, but they're horrifying about what you faced as an enslaved person trying to escape. There was a fabulous Frontline PBS documentary about Harriet Tubman last week. I knew so little of what that taught. If you can get PBS, if you have Passport, it's all about Harriet, and I found out why she became the woman she became of freeing slaves. She escaped herself after horrible mistreatment, which resulted in epileptic fits for her whole life. She got hit in the head with an iron. But she went down south the first time to rescue her husband. Well, jumped the broom, not legal marriage. She brought him a beautiful white suit. She carried it down. I don't know how she was going to pull this off. She gets down there. He's with some other woman.
Oh, no.
So she comes right back up and then vows, I'm not going to stop going back down there to help other people. Then you find out that she was like a general in the Civil War and helped the most ever black people become free, 800 people. It's an incredible story, and we just know the tiniest bit. Anything else? Yes?
You know if your book is used in schools?
Is my book used in schools? So that's the question about what's happening now. 17 states don't want it. Dr. Shabazz is from Texas. We'd love to do something on Zoom or go there. He said, they're not going to let us in. There's so much backlash that we brought it into the schools in Massachusetts. Just got an invitation yesterday from another teacher in the same school saying, we heard about how well it went with the history teacher. We're doing stuff in the English department related to your work. Can you come back? So we're trying to get it into schools. And we've done a number of colleges. We did Trinity, we've done Amherst College, Smith, where I worked, we're trying to get a reading, and UMass. So if you know of anybody that wants us, let me know. And the book is for sale. It's usually $25. We've reduced it to $20, and I'm here to sign it. I can't sign it for Dr. Shabazz. He has a very flowery signature, but I have to take my word for it. Anything else? Please, don't hesitate. Yes?
I actually have a question. I just wanted to say it was so nice to hear this with what's going on in the world. That's why I came today.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we feel this is an incredibly timely book, a book for our times. And the dedication says this: To all those who defiantly and courageously sought freedom, justice, and equality then, and to those who continue to do so now. Because there's no separation between what they were fighting against was obviously heinous and horrific for hundreds of years, but what we're fighting against is pretty scary too. Those of us who are taking an active role. And I'll sign books if anybody wants to get books on.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. That was really very interesting. There are books, as he mentioned, they're back there. You can get one, and he'll stick around and sign it. Join us next month. We have Andy Hotchman is going to be here. The subject is Family Matters. She wrote a book about family and how we chronicle our histories. If you want to come back, hope to see you in April. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks for coming, everybody.